Alfredo guy. He sounds awesome. I want to thank everyone from the Faith Life Church for just being so hospitable to me and my wife. We feel very much welcome at home. So thank you, Pastor Murray, of course, my man Colin. The magic of the interwebs.
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing. I also was taught not to talk to strangers as well, because you don't know who you're really talking to a lot when you're on the internet,
Right.
So I didn't want this to be some kind of like biblical catfish type of situation.
Right.
It's like, But apologetics, right? And he brought up what's considered the main scripture defining apology, having an answer, right? Apologetic doesn't mean that we're apologizing for our beliefs. It doesn't mean that. It means a defense, right? And when we're talking about defending the faith, we're also going to talk about evangelism this weekend as well, because it goes hand in hand. Because when you're reaching out to people, guess what? They're going to have questions. And if you can't answer their questions, chances are they're not going to continue coming with you to learn about God, right? But even though apologetics mostly is us reaching out to those who are not with God, a lot of times it's for the believers. Because something that we struggle with a lot is doubt. What I believe, is it true? We want to believe it's true, but then we'll have certain conversations with people and they'll have very compelling arguments for you, and you don't know how to answer that. And then we get insecure. And then we start doubting. It's like, well, this thing that I've been taught all this time, is it legit? Is it true? So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is actually more in-house. It's for you to have a more grounded conviction about the thing you already believe in. And we can't really go into anything else with the Bible until we talk about God. Right? Because those who critique us, that's what they attack first. Because if I can shut down the concept of God, then everything else you're saying is just fairy tales and makeup. That's it. So we're going to talk about, does God exist? And a lot of times when people ask us that question, it's kind of hard for us to come up with a compelling answer. Because for those of us who believe in Christ, that's a foregone conclusion. Of course God exists. That's it.
Right.
But for somebody who has an issue with it, can you articulate an argument that help people to see that, well, maybe there is a God? So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss one particular way, one approach that we can use to help people understand who God is. And a lot of that has to do with science. And we'll get to that in a moment. So one of the most famous arguments for the existence of God is actually called the Kalam cosmological argument. Oh, by the way, we're going to get real nerdy.
That's right.
So strap in, get your pocket protectors ready. It's going to, it's going to be a little nerdy. But it's a formal argument for proving the existence of God introduced by the Islamic philosopher Avicenna, also known as Ibn Sina. Avicenna argued that there must be a necessary existence, an entity that cannot not exist. Now, somebody has brought that argument back into the modern day era. This gentleman by the name of William Lane Craig. He says here that the argument is a modern formulation of the cosmological argument for the existence of God, rooted in the Ilm al-Kalam heritage in medieval Islamic Shalitism. An outspoken proponent of the argument is William Lane Craig, who first defended it in his book, The Kalam Cosmological Argument. So the basic argument is this, right? Whatever begins to exist has a cause, right? That's not too hard thing to grasp, right? This church building didn't just come out of thin air. Somebody, a group of people decided we're going to build a church building, right? It didn't just happen, right? The universe began to exist. And then point 3, the universe has a cause. Now, no one has a problem with the first premise. Everybody pretty much gets that. The second part, though, some people have had issues with. We're going to address that. Did the universe begin to exist? So we're going to start, whatever begins to exist has a cause. So this is, of course, Albert Einstein. Now, his problem was he believed that the universe was eternal, that it always existed. So the idea of the universe having a beginning, it perplexed him. And it says here, it was 1916 and Albert Einstein didn't like where his calculations were leading him. If his theory of general relativity was true, it meant that the universe was not eternal, but had a beginning. Einstein's calculations indeed were revealing a definite beginning to all time, all matter, and all space. This flew in the face of his belief that the universe was static and eternal. In fact, his model of the universe was called the steady state model, meaning that it was always here, right? So Einstein later called this discovery irritating. He didn't like the idea that the universe might have a cause. He wanted the universe to be self-existent, not relying on any outside cause. But the universe appeared to be one giant effect. In fact, Einstein so disliked the implications of general relativity, a theory that is now proven accurate to 5 decimal places, that he introduced a cosmological constant, which some have since called a fudge factor, it's cheap, into his equations in order to show that the universe is static and to avoid an absolute beginning. Now, greatest mind that ever walked the earth, and he's cheating. Because he didn't like where his science was leading him. So he was trying to rig the game in his favor, right? So, in 1929, Einstein made a pilgrimage to Mount Wilson to look through Hubble's telescope for himself. What he saw was irrefutable. The observational evidence showed that the universe was indeed expanding, as general relativity had predicted. With his cosmological constant now completely crushed by the weight of the evidence against it, Einstein could no longer support his wish for an eternal universe. He described the cosmological constant as the greatest blunder of my life. Now, as a side note, when we think of people who are involved in science, we're thinking, well, these people are very, tried and true, and they're very transparent, that, we're going to go wherever the data takes us. You've heard people say that. Well, the data was taking him someplace he didn't want to go. And he was trying to rig the game. So when people talk about science is just this accurate way of understanding nature. Really? Because scientists are, guess what? They're humans. They have emotions. They get in their feelings like everybody else. Doesn't matter if they like wearing lab coats or Bunsen burners. They're humans, and they have biases. So I always want to check when someone says, well, it's because of science, right? You got to do your due diligence. So, all right. Until about the time of Einstein, atheists could comfort themselves with the belief that the universe is eternal and thus did not need a cause. But since then, 5 lines of scientific evidence have been discovered that prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe did indeed have a beginning. And that beginning was what scientists now call the Big Bang. So, we're going to look at a couple of things that shows us that the universe did have a beginning. One of those things is called the second law of thermodynamics. Right? Thermodynamics is the study of matter and energy, and the second law states, among other things, that the universe is running out of usable energy. With each passing moment, the amount of usable energy in the universe grows smaller, leading scientists to the obvious conclusion that one day, all the energy will be gone, and the universe will die. Like a running car, the universe will ultimately run out of gas. And we see that about everything. We see things that are created, but through time, they decay. If you're a homeowner, every 7 years, you got to do the roofing, right? There's different things that got to be updated because things are in a state of constant decay. It might take thousands of years, but little by little, matter is changing its energy to something else. Now, if you live in an eternal universe, the running out of gas should have happened a long time ago.
Right.
but it's still, spending its energy. So the energy had to come from someplace, right? And we wonder what that place is. We'll get to that later. Right? The universe is expanding. Good scientific theories are those that are able to predict phenomena. They have not yet been observed. As we've seen, general relativity predicted an expanding universe, but it wasn't until legendary astronomer Edward Hubble looked through his telescope more than a decade later that scientists finally confirmed that the universe is expanding and that it's expanding from a single point. Astronomer Vestal Melvin Silfler was hot on the trail of this expanding universe as early as 1913, but it was Hubble who put all the pieces together in the late 20s. This expanding universe is the second line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. So we know that, one, energy changes through time. But for energy to change, it had to have a starting point. Here, through looking at this huge telescope, we saw the universe growing. Something can't grow unless it had a starting point, right? So all this new scientific revelation is leading us to the same place. Like, there's a beginning here. There is a starting point. All right, technically known as the cosmic background radiation. This afterglow is actually light and heat from the initial explosion, the Big Bang. This light is no longer visible because its wavelength has been stretched by the expanding universe to wavelengths slightly shorter than those produced by a microwave oven. But the heat can still be detected. That's how amazing science has become, that we can actually detect these slight microwave variations through the universe. But the more data we collect, the data is leading us all back to a starting point. Right? Every time they find something new, it's like, well, wait a minute, that must mean that there's a starting point here. Agnostic astronomer Robert Jethro put it this way: no explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation. The clincher, which has convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in a great explosion. Supporters of the steady state theory have tried desperately to find an alternative explanation, but they have failed. At the present time, the Big Bang theory has no competitors. So he's getting on Einstein. It's like, stop with the fudging, stop cheating, look at the data for real, and just admit what you're seeing. Because this is observable information. This is not just theories in the head. They have concrete data, right? The Great Galaxy Seeds. 1989, the search for those ripples was intensified when NASA launched the 200 million satellite aptly called COBE for Cosmic Background Explorer, carrying extremely sensitive instruments. COBE, is it COBE or COBE? I'm going to say COBE. I like how it sounds. COBE. Was able to see whether or not these ripples actually existed in the background radiation and how precise were. COBE not only found the ripples, but scientists were amazed at their precision. The ripples showed that the explosion of the universe was precisely tweaked to cause just enough matter to congregate to allow galaxy formation, but not enough to cause the universe to collapse back on itself. Any slight variation one way or the other, and none of us would be here to tell about it. In fact, the ripples are so exact, down to 1 part in 100,000, that Smoot called them the, quote, mannequinning marks from the creation of the universe and the fingerprints of the maker. Scientists saying that. Scientists saying that their instruments have gotten so well calibrated that they can see exactly when this explosion occurred. Now, there's always something that ignites an explosion, right? But again, it leads us back to there had to be a beginning. So the theory of general relativity is the fifth line of scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. And its discovery was the beginning of the end of the idea that the universe is eternal. The theory itself has been verified to 5 decimal places, demands an absolute beginning for time, space, and matter are called relative. You can't have one without the other. Basically, the theory is once you have matter, you got to have time and you got to have space. All these 3 things have to show up at the same time. You cannot have one without the other. Now, a simple way to remember that is the acronym SEARCH. Right? So, how do you know that the universe began? It's like, well, second law of thermodynamics, the expanding universe, the radiation afterglow from the Big Bang, the great galaxy seeds, and Einstein's theory of general relativity. You know, and shout out to Mr. Frank Turek for putting that acronym. So it's a cute way of trying to remember, because that's a lot of science. Let's be clear, that's a lot of science. You know, so, but I think that's a great way to remember these things. And when an atheist talks to you, and you bring this up, they're going to feel some type of way because they just assume that Christians don't like science. That we're anti-science for some reason. Like, we're not anti-science. We're actually more honest with science than you are. Because Einstein was trying to cheat. Right? So again, whatever begins to exist has a cause. We now know, through science, the universe began to exist. So the universe has a cause. Now it gets interesting because if the universe has a cause, and science has proven that, like, it's no longer up for debate. The science community does not argue this fact. We now know, based on the data, the universe began. And logically, we know that only way things can begin is if something causes it to begin. Right. So now, that's the question. What caused it, right? So it is plausible that the universe began to exist, given the intuitively obvious principle that whatever begins to exist has a cause of its existence. We have been led to conclude that the universe has a cause for its existence. On the basis of our argument, this cause would have to be uncaused, eternal, changeless, timeless, and immaterial. Moreover, it would have to be a personal agent who freely elects to create an effect in time. Therefore, on the basis of the Kalam cosmological argument, I conclude that it is rational to believe that God exists. It's rational. It makes sense. You're not Looney Tunes when you say you believe God created the universe. How so? Look at the data, right? So if we know everything had a first cause, right? So that means that whatever caused that had to be on cause. Because this is a little crazy, but in order to have causation, you need time, space, and matter. But to cause that thing that caused that can't have space, time, and matter. Right? That first cause doesn't have any time. Because time doesn't exist yet. It's not made of anything. Because there's no matter yet. There's no place to put that cause because there's no space yet. Right? So what do we know that's timeless, causeless, and immaterial? You know, for us who believe, when we look at that, we think, oh, that's God. That's God. Right? So now, we were doing all that with no Bible. Right? We can actually tell someone that it's rational to believe in God based on science. But does the Bible give us any kind of connection with what science has been proven? Well, just so happens it does. Don't gotta go too far in your Bible to figure it out. Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God was before the beginning. So he was in the beginning. So he had to be there before the beginning.
Right.
So if he's before the beginning, then he's an on-cause cause. That means he's timeless. That means he's not made of stuff. You know, which is interesting because, you know, a lot of times people like to make fun of God. You hear atheists say, oh, well, you know, you must as well just believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Or, you know, hey, I believe in unicorns, so that I guess that's okay too. It's like, yeah, well, those things are made up of stuff, aren't they?
Exactly.
Right? Unicorn, if it was to exist, has to eat and breathe air. It's made up of stuff. It has organs. That's not what when we say God, we're not saying that. Right? People like to tell us what our God is. Like, no, I'll tell you who I think my God is. It's my God. You don't tell me, I tell you. Right? So a lot of times people like to put God in these weird places that goes against scripture and science.
Right.
And science.
Oh.
So that was a lot to sink in, you know. But this is Q&A, but I have a question for you though. Now, with this argument showing that, you know, the universe has a beginning, a cause, therefore that cause is God, does that 100% prove that God exists? Does this argument completely prove that? Without a doubt, that God exists.
From a scientific perspective, it pretty much seals the deal, because most of those who subscribe to the area of science as proof, then this will pretty much level that conversation and seal it. Also, that brings up another thought. I was listening to Robert Zacharias this week, and he had said to a scientist, or a conversation about a question from a scientist, and the question was posed from him to them is, what in your science books makes you tell the truth about what you discover? And there's no book there's no subscription or what they subscribe to, or no book for the scientists that tells them that they have to tell the truth about their findings. So this seals.
Like Einstein, for instance, like he saw what was coming down the pipe. He's like, I didn't like that, so we're gonna do a remix.
Right.
We're gonna change it up because I didn't like what I saw. Yes.
I'm gonna piggyback on what Joe said. Dr. Frank Turek that was on the screen earlier. He has a saying that he says all the time. It's like, science doesn't say anything, scientists do, right? And what he's going by that is that the scientists, based on the data, right? What Joe said, they don't have any mandate that says they have to tell the truth of their findings, right? So they can interpret that data however they want. Okay, so that's why you can have one TV commercial that says 4 out of 5 dentists choose Crest, and the other TV commercial that says 4 out of 5 dentists choose Colgate, right? So are they talking to the same guys? It depends on if you're paying them enough, right? So that's one of those things that you have to be able to recognize when you look at the data. What is it actually saying, right? There's no argument between faith and reason. There is none, right? We can't do science unless God exists. We can't do this. We can't. There's always going to be a cause and effect. We know that. Babies understand that with their children's toys. When they push the button and the little thing pops up, the little play school thing, the little guy pops up, and they push it again, and the little guy pops up. They're learning cause and effect. So in the world, when Einstein is looking at the relativity, and you see that the universe is a giant effect, he knew in his mind there had to be a cause.
And he didn't want to admit that to himself.
That's right.
Yeah, and also, first of all, thank you for this. This is really amazing so far. Unfortunately, we're going to give it a second because of some other obligations. But I appreciate the question, because does it prove God's existence?
100%. Does it prove it 100%?
I'm not sure that proves his existence, at least today. It may have then proved his existence then. Is he still around today? That's another question.
Right.
But I do. There is one thing when it comes to, obviously, the start of the universe. They talk about the Big Bang, this and that, or whatever. What's interesting is they describe scientifically the Big Bang, it being, some type of, huge explosion. And scientifically speaking, logically speaking, obviously we know that any type of explosion is triggered by something.
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So obviously, to say that the universe was just started by the Big Bang, nothing started it, doesn't even make sense, because you know that in order for you to create an explosion, you're gonna have to push on some type of button or trigger.
Right.
And I remember listening to someone who is a colleague of yours in this Apologetics, who at the very end of his statement, as far as the Big Bang per se, and for him, he believes in that as far as, because the universe could have started in other ways, but he believes in that. He would say, you know what? If there was indeed a Big Bang, if the universe did indeed start through some type of huge explosion, then his question to the people was, who is the Big Banger?
Right. Who banged it?
Who banged
Right.
it?
Who banged it?
That's it.
And so from that standpoint, does it totally explain or prove some existence of God? We have yet to still, at least through science, definitely prove that. Of course, we know those of us who are in the faith community.
Right.
I'm an evangelist, I'm a pastor, so I believe in
Right.
that.
Right.
It's a faith issue. Anybody can just say, oh, it was triggered by something else,
Right.
whatever. So I think we still have a bit of a, way.
Yeah. And here's the thing, and we need to be real.
Yeah.
All right. It's a compelling argument, but does it prove 100% with no doubt that God exists? No, it doesn't.
No.
There is no argument that proves 100% that God exists. What you want to do with this is show that it's reasonable to believe that God is the bang. If I say God did this, don't look at me like I'm crazy anymore.
Right.
Oh, you're just that Christian. You just believe it and that's it. Like, no. Data coincides with my conviction.
Right.
So you might not believe in God, but you can't say I'm crazy. And that's the start. Right? Because once they realize, I don't agree with you, but what you're saying, I can make sense of that. That's rational. You actually used your brain for that. And now, when you have more conversations with that person, they're more apt to listen to you. Because people have all sorts of weird connotations when it comes to a Christian and what that entails. What we want to do is deconstruct whatever stereotype they have of us. It's like, no, we like our brains. God gave it to us.
Right.
Right? Greatest commandment, use your heart, mind, soul, and mind for God. Right? It's an emotional exercise, but it's also a mental one. And people need to see that as Christians, we think.
Right.
We look at the data you look at, and you know what? We're a little bit more honest with the data than you are. Sorry. Because we're held accountable by something much greater than us. You're not. That's why you feel comfortable fudging the data. Right? So yes.
And if you don't mind me, and again, just going back to the statement that this brother again made at the end, for me when I heard that, of course again I'm a Christian, I know God exists, but his point was to say, who's the Big Banger? Well, of course it's God.
Right.
But for me, I was like, no, your question means that there is definitely a Big Banger.
It's just who it is.
But I don't know who it is.
Right. And that's a great point.
Yeah.
Science does this data doesn't say who the cause is.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's just because of us, because we have a theistic worldview.
Yeah.
When we look at the data, we interpret it as, that sounds a whole lot like Genesis 1:1 to me.
Right.
Now, to someone else, might think, well, it's aliens. The problem with that is, okay, well, who made them?
Right.
And then who made them? And then who made them? And then you get caught in this thing called infinite regress, which is completely not logical. Because all you're doing is moving the goalpost one more yard. One more yard. You can do that for, it's like that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Since they say we're not logical people, Christians, right?
Yeah.
No, what you're doing is not logical.
Yeah.
Because the data shows there was day one. There was a day one. Now we can argue who made that day. But you can't argue there wasn't a day one anymore. Science shows you that. Right? Any other questions? We good?
All right.
So,
Good deal. Okay. At this moment, we're on the agenda. We have a short break. If we're okay, then we can continue to press forward. One more thing. Again, the restrooms for those, all of us have been here before, I think, except for a couple. Restrooms are in the back hallway down here on the left. Right? No place else to go except to run out the back door. So,
also, I know there's a lot of information. So what I think we should do is try to create links
yeah.
for these PowerPoint presentations and you put it on your website, Facebook page. 'Cause that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff that got crammed in like 20 minutes. So they'll feel like, you know, and here's this test now. And, you know what I mean? That's a lot. That was a lot. So.
Yeah, and at any point in time, for here for the local area, we're going to be going over this stuff again, either in Learner's Lounge and or on Friday Night Bible Study when we bring that back. So we will have this again. We'll have it in more detail. We'll take our time with it, you know, stuff like that. So no worries about that on the local level, okay?
So next,
All right, want to hit the session 2?
how do I do that?
Okay, well, I got you right here. All right. Okay.
And
Everybody, God bless you.
thanks for coming,
God bless,
bro.
man. Yeah.
Yes, please, please. And for everybody here, this is about as sciencey as we're going to get today. It's not. We're going to get back more into scriptures and, you know, familiar territory and all that. You know. Yeah, I'll let some water. There's my wife, everybody.
Hey.
My lovely assistant. All right, so let's do. You want to do the kingdom or?
Oh, kingdom. I'm sorry. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, man, I got excited.
Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody say what's up to the people on Facebook land.
Hello. Good morning.
All right.
What's up, Carl?
That's right. Yeah, I know, right?
Right.
There you go.
So, like I said, most of the stuff we're going to talk about today is more in-house, right? So, we're going to talk about church, right? How we get here and how does it operate, you know? And in doing so, we're going to learn a few things. We're going to learn about how the Bible actually connects really well. We're going to see how the Old Testament clicks extremely well with the New Testament. We're also going to look at some practicals of how the church, in its inception, how did they maneuver? How did they work together? And we're going to do a little exercise, hopefully, to see how we can do that as well. So I'm going to wait for these guys to come back and for my water. So, should someone stop that camera or phone, or is it still going?
Actually, I don't know how to start. Colin, can you put a halt on the phone real quick?
Yeah.
Well, I guess is anybody else coming back, or is it just these guys?
That's it, I think, for now.